Hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining the third session of the Hollow Society Talks. My name is Sagar. I serve as the chair of the technical subcommittee of the GEF CSO Network, and I'm also the Chief Technology Officer at Plan for the Planet. And it's an honor to host this series again. It's great to see many of you back, and warm welcome to those joining for the first time. So in our first session, we looked at how communities access funding through Small Grants Program and the Inclusive Conservation Initiative. In our second, we focused on inclusion, transparency, and accountability. We asked how GEF-9 can move from commitments to practice. And now, with the second replenishment meeting just around the corner, we move to the big question: where should GEF-9 money go? We've said this since the start of GEF-9. Today, we're asking our council members in front of you all, should there be a clear allocation, say 10%, that goes directly to civil society? And how can CSOs be part of big GEF programs, not just add-ons? Again, if you haven't followed our previous discussion, please check out the GEF CSO Network blog to follow along. Let's get started by introducing our speakers. First of all, from the GEF Secretariat, we're very pleased to welcome Adriana Moreira. Adriana is the head of partnerships, and she's been in the development sector longer than I've been on this planet. She brings a wealth of experience and knowledge, and she's the real champion for civil society, working to expand engagement through GEF mechanisms that open access for communities and organizations. Next,
many
from
thanks,
Sweden.
Sagar. Pleasure to be here and sharing this.
Welcome, Adriana. Next, from Sweden, the largest GEF 8 contributor per capita, we have Anders Arvidsson. Anders is GEF Council member since September 2024, and he is also the senior advisor at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Anders. And from Switzerland, the third largest GEF 8 contributor per capita, we are joined by Gabriela Platter. Gabriela has been on the GEF Council since January 2021, and she serves as the policy advisor for international environment finance at the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment. So we have with us council members from two of the most generous donor countries per capita. And I saw we may have other council members as well. If you'd like to join the discussion at the end, please let us know in the chat. And if you're here, please give us a shout out so we can bring you to the discussion as well. So with that, let's dive in. Anders, let me start with you. GEF-9 is being shaped at a time when inclusion is central, yet youth, women, community-based and indigenous groups still receive only a small share of direct resources. From Sweden's perspective, what are the main gaps you see, and how can GEF-9 do better in including and resourcing those groups?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting us to this consultation. We really appreciate this direct and very informal format of dialogue. And I will be short on protocol to allow time for more interventions and questions. But for us, we view the gaps in terms of where are there possibilities where non-state stakeholders could play a role to achieve and sustain long-term results, where we currently don't fully untap the potential of non-state stakeholders. So I think that is what is really critical to see how we can do better on that in GEF-9. We believe an inclusive but streamlined and efficient whole of society process can be a very helpful tool in identifying at an early stage such gaps. And I will revert to this more in detail in the later questions. In terms of direct resources, I'm very glad, Sagar, that you mentioned transparency and accountability, because from a major donor point of view, in the end of the day, we need to explain and justify how the contributions are being spent, and measures to improve accountability and transparency clearly would be helpful. So very glad that you bring that up, because I think that's also a key component to look at how we can address that better in GEF-9 as a whole. Sweden always have an active participation of Indigenous Peoples, representatives from the Samirati in our COP delegations to the UNFCCC and UNCBD. And they are always an active and integrated part of our internal consultations ahead of the COPs. We also have an administrative culture, which is very similar to what Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the GEF CEO, is proposing with the whole of government and whole of society processes. And therefore, we fully stand behind him on this in GEF-9, because we think that in itself is a very useful tool to strengthen inclusion in GEF-9 ahead. At the same time, as a major donor, we also feel an obligation to ensure that all of the most well-intended support for IPLC does not, despite the best of intentions, risk translating into reduced efficiency on other areas of the whole. So just to put a sort of sketchy example from a Swedish context, that if we were an implementing country and had a strict requirement to have IPLC in every project, we would not be able to carry out projects below the polar circle. Still there would be areas elsewhere where we still would need to work on nature protection, climate mitigation, chemicals, and the other focal areas. So just to say that while we are being principally fully supportive of a meaningful IPLC inclusion, our message is that it should not be designed in a way which may risk steering resources away from areas where there may also be prospects for strong results. So we need sort of both and need to have a flexibility there. So to us, the key is to have IPLC demonstrate that they are part of the solution to achieve and sustain long-term results. And I believe a principal recognition is important, while also at the same time balancing it with flexibility. So this could be captured through an active participation and involvement within the whole of society process on a case-to-case basis as well. So we believe that an early involvement of all stakeholders through this process could be very instrumental. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Anders. Gabriela, over to you. GEF-9 emphasizes the whole of society and accountability, but the draft policy direction still leave flexibility on tracking how resources actually reach CSOs. From Switzerland's perspective, what are the biggest shifts compared to GEF-8, and where do you still see the accountability gaps?
Thank you very much, Sagar, and thank you also for the invitation and this informal format. I think it's helpful. Also from the whole society approach, I think it's important that CSOs get involved in the replenishment process, and we very much appreciate that you also provide this wider exchange platforms for the various in a virtual format so that we can be as inclusive as possible. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think, well, first of all, the biggest shift is probably that it's so strategically anchored. If you look at the GEF-9 replenishment document, the whole of society approach, the logic of the whole of society approach is anchored very deeply in the programming directions. You can really see it across the entire programming directions, and it's a spirit that as I think especially also the CEO very much lives for, and he really believes in it. So you can really tell that it's been strategically anchored across the entire document. And that's probably, I would say, the strongest shift that you can see, like this visionary leadership element. And we see CSOs very strongly as executing agencies. You are agents of change on the ground. You're very close to the communities most vulnerable to environmental degradation, to climate change, and so on. You work with people most affected. And so we feel you're very important and critical partners, especially for execution. We also have 2 international CSOs, which are implementing agencies, which we were very supportive of with Conservation International and WWF. And they have, of course, maybe even a closer link to the CSO community. And we hope they also work even more with CSO executing agencies as well. But we would expect all implementing agencies to closely collaborate and work with CSOs as executing agencies on the ground. And in terms of accountability question, I think that there are different ways, right? You can be an executing agency, you can be a recipient, you can be included in project design and program design. There's different ways of living the whole of society approach. and not one size fits all. I think it depends largely on the country context. It depends on the program project context, and depending on what we're talking about, a different approach may be more fit for purpose. And I think there, especially if you speak about a target as you have framed it on the 10%, quite frankly, I don't think that will be possible. And the question is also, how would you track that, right? Would the 10% mean 10% CSO execution? Would it be 10% projects with CSO involvement? If that were the case, I would say that's way too little. So it's really the question of what do you mean with these 10% and how would you even measure it? We would greatly appreciate if the share of execution through CSOs would significantly increase. We also appreciate agency diversification, including a larger share for Conservation International and WWF. But we wouldn't say just because, for example, the 2 CSOs, which are implementing agencies, would implement 10%, you don't get a better or more assured CSO involvement on the ground itself. So it really depends a bit also what you mean and see with that. But at large, I think, especially we as Switzerland, we're very much supportive, similar to what Anders said, I think, of the generic approach of the whole society approach. And we've been very vocal about that as well, and supportive in the first replenishment meeting, and we will continue to do that. But I think we have to keep an open mind on how we actually implement it, depending on the country and the project context. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. We will come back to what we mean by the 10%. But for now, over to you, Anders. Sweden has long championed gender equality and youth leadership in global processes. How can GEF-9 make sure these groups move from symbolic participation to being real partners in co-design and in co-implementation of GEF projects?
On youth leadership first, this is close to my heart as I have personally worked for the EU with youth, climate and environment civil society groups, working with local communities in West Africa, in working together, empowering their efforts and supporting their outreach within their societies. So we clearly see the value of this, no doubt about that. At the same time, that does not necessarily mean that, for instance, the Fonseca Leadership Program would be the only way to carry out such activities. So just to say, we need to go in with an openness to see how can we best make use of these capacities and resources within GEF-9, and to have a good and active dialogue on that. And to us, the whole of society approach is really the key to create a meaningful and inclusive participation with all of the stakeholders. We have therefore suggested to positively incentivize those implementing countries who champion the whole of society approach by creating positive examples in GEF-9 in its implementation, and by rewarding an active cooperation with non-state stakeholders through positive economic incentives, because we think that can be a wise way to also incentivize the implementing states to really make out the most of the whole of society approach and really be seriously committed to it. So that's one way in which we have suggested to really roll this out and award those who make the most out of it and have a genuine consultation with civil society and other non-stakeholders. On gender specifically, it's by far no secret that Sweden has been a strong and active advocate for gender mainstreaming and the gender action plans. We openly supported gender mainstreaming at the most recent council in June. As we also, beyond the normative value, we also see from a recent independent IEO evaluation that the gender mainstreaming yields concrete results. We have more than 90% of the projects where the results are actually improving as a consequence of the gender mainstreaming. So it's not only a question of gender, but also a question of improving results through gender mainstreaming. And I think that's also important in these times to be very clear about, since we have the data to back these results and to back the gender mainstreaming. And we will continue to stand actively behind this. There is no doubt about that in GEF-9. We also, as a side note, we note the finding in the MOPAN evaluation that there would also be a need to strengthen staff resources on gender and private sector integration in the Secretariat in GEF-9 to further achieve this mainstreaming on both areas, and we clearly will support that in GEF-9 as well. When speaking of co-design and implementation, at the same time, I also want to challenge the civil society stakeholders into considering how you can contribute to make the whole of society process becoming efficient in terms of consultations. We are, as said, all for whole of society format. We believe it's great, it's inclusive, but it also, in the end, will need to be balanced with efficient and time-wise efficient consultations, which does not create excessive and time-consuming bureaucracy that might also, in the other end, reduce the appetite for additional finance by other parties to step in and scale up results. So I think this is an effort we all collectively need to look at, to contribute to make the whole of society an efficient instrument for long-term results. Is a challenge we all collectively respond to. And we will clearly commit political support and financial resources to its implementation. And all parties involved need to do their share within their respective roles in it to ensure that the structure will turn into an inclusive improvement, which we all hope to see. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Back to you, Gabriela. Switzerland has often been a strong voice for transparency. What concrete steps could strengthen civil society's role in decision making so CSOs are part of shaping programs, not just implementing them?
Thank you, Sagar. Yeah, I think again, there are different ways to do that, right? I think including CSO and the CSOs in the design stage, be it on the local as well as on the global level. I think we'll talk about the IPs a bit later as well, but there is a global element there, and we appreciate CSO involvement also in the global program design of programmatic approaches. Again, it depends what the topic is, which CSO, right? It wouldn't be one and the same CSO for everything. And then you have very strongly localized CSOs, but you also have more globally active CSOs. And depending on what we're talking about, different groups and stakeholders should be involved. But in any case, a voice at the table is essential. Again, I come from a country which embeds the whole society approach very much. We have 3 CSO representatives on every international negotiation delegation. They get access to all position papers, negotiation mandates, everything. Every policy in Switzerland needs to be consulted. There's a formal consultation process. Every individual even can respond to an official consultation process and make edits or request edits to a policy. And then, yeah, in the end, of course, it's Parliament that decides about the policies, and it's the government that decides or proposes to Parliament on policies, but it's always based on consultations and consideration of views, which are very broadly reflected in the population. And of course, because we have a very strong referendum policy, everything has to hold votes in Switzerland. So inclusion of or the embedding of the whole of society approach is essential for politicians to actually survive, because everything goes for a vote. So I think we are, maybe the GEF could learn a bit from the Swiss system on how we do it, that we do consult very broadly on different things, also on different levels of government. And yeah, so I think there are different ways of including CSOs in decision making. And speaking of the different levels of government, honestly, the GEF is one of the funds with the strongest CSO voices in the council meetings. You get to talk whenever you want to. You can ask for the floor very often. CSOs even speak first and break the ice, which personally I very much appreciate. I think there again, maybe as a piece of advice, I think it would be great if you would shape your messages in the council as well as the replenishment meetings very much to the policy documents and the issues we discuss, and make very concrete suggestions and recommendations on what you want to see changed. Because that way, as policymakers and council members and actors in the replenishment process, we can actually take those into account. We can consider your amendments, your ideas for very concrete changes, and then consider how they match with our own positions and reflect on it and maybe make suggestions back or embed them in our own positions. So I think the most targeted you interact, the most impact you will have. And that speaks to all levels of interaction. So be it in the council, be it in global project design, be it on local project design and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders and Gabriela, for laying out these perspectives. Now let's turn to the Secretariat. Adriana, you've heard some of these points already. The Small Grants Program and the ICI are very important, but too small to carry the whole inclusion agenda. How will GEF-9 ensure CSOs are embedded in all medium and full-size projects, including large integrated programs and different focal areas, not just niche windows?
Thank you. Thank you, Sagar. And this is very interesting dialogue. Very pleased to be part of this and an excellent initiative from the CSO network supported by our division. And it's a pleasure to discuss these issues with you. As mentioned by Anders and Gabriela, there are many aspects that shape our relationship with civil society organizations, and the whole of society approach has been now put very much upfront in GEF-9, but has been permeating the work of the GEF, I think, since inception. And you mentioned the dedicated windows, but we have a very active participation of civil society organizations throughout the portfolio, particularly with the involvement as mentioned as executive agencies in many projects. We are doing research in the portfolio to quantify this participation on just GEF 6, GEF 7. There are more established programs now, and we have the projects, and aiming to learn from this and to see how we can expand in that under GEF-9. This is something upcoming that we have. But I also want to highlight the importance of the other aspects where the engagement of civil society is very important for the GEF. The GEF serves 6 multilateral agreements at the moment, and I think it's very relevant for us that we facilitate the process of engagement of the networks at the level of the multilateral agreements. We support the participation of youth networks, gender networks, civil society organizations in these discussions and the high-level dialogue at the global ambit of these conventions. This is very important. Another aspect directed at engagement is in our country engagement strategy. When we bring civil society to engage with the governments and the focal points, the GEF focal points and the government personnel that work directly in shaping the portfolios, the national portfolios, I think these dialogues represent a very important opportunity for civil society, and we bring usually to what we call the standard constituency workshops to civil society organizations per country. This is and including Indigenous peoples and local community organizations. This has been proven to be an excellent approach in terms of facilitating this dialogue and even letting the government know that these resources exist within their own countries. And in my experience, I have seen projects, real, actual projects coming out of this dialogue. So I want to highlight. Another very important aspect for us is the capacity building. The capacity building in terms of we have the promotion of more direct capacity building for youth with the Fonseca, but we have the engagement of the youth networks in the examples that I gave before. So in summary, I think we have this three-pronged approach, okay? So facilitate engagement at the global level, facilitate engagement at the country, national level, and regional level. The Secretariat promotes that a lot. Also, in our dialogue with agencies, we incentivize and discuss about engagement of civil society, particularly to our stakeholder policy, where upstream we identify the stakeholders in the different project proposals. And then through that, there are these dialogues with the agencies in terms of engagement with the partners on the ground of that particularly proposed project. So this has also produced either local organizations becoming executive agencies in projects or direct participation and being recipient of funds. So these integrated approaches, I think, really are over the years bringing more and more. And I think, as mentioned by Anders and Gabriela, the GEF is one of the funds that have a more direct involvement of civil society, not only through the civil society network, but also with our advisory Indigenous Peoples group, IPAG. So I think we're learning, this is a process that we're going together, but I'm very proud to look at what we've done so far and how we're going to expand that into GEF-9. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Let's go back to Switzerland. Gabriela, integrated programs are expected to drive GEF-9's transformational work. One practical way to make whole of society real is to ensure civil society and Indigenous people have a seat in IP steering bodies. Would Switzerland support exploring this approach? And how could this be done?
Yeah, I think I hinted at it before. I think we'd be supportive of that idea. Again, it depends on the thematic scope, and I think there are two different ways, right? There's like the global steering committees, and then there are also steering committees of child projects individually in the various countries as they're being implemented. And if you speak to the global coordinating child project, I guess you would call it, the one which is run by the IP agency usually, there a CSO that would be included in a steering committee, for example, would have to have a global reach geographically, or at least a reach in those regions which are most touched upon by the IP. And depending on the interest of countries, that might change a little bit, right? Because countries will apply, and then that designs what kind of child projects come into an IP. And the CSO would have to have a clear experience and expertise in the specific area of the IP. So you can have the same, or we wouldn't, for example, not see the CSO network as stakeholder being represented in those committees. It would have to be a CSO organization that is actually working in the various areas of the specific IP. And we also prefer and favor if there are actual CSO involvements in project designs, be it steering committees or other ways of consultation, depending on the country context, with CSOs on the ground locally when the child projects are being implemented. And that, again, speaks also to, I always said CSOs, of course, that speaks to youth IPLC representation as well. And I very much appreciate that Adriana was referring to IPAG as well, which I think plays a crucial role in that space as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Gabriela. Back to you, Adriana. And we're talking about co-financing. Co-financing expectation can block smaller CSOs from accessing funds. How can GEF-9 adapt co-financing requirements so community organizations are not excluded?
Well, Sagar, I don't think co-financing was ever a barrier for inclusion. We have, over 30,000 projects in the SGP that tells that, but also over the years, but also, in larger projects, in my practice, that was never an impediment for civil society participation. Or I think it's much more a matter of the approach of each project. And it's very important because when you build a project, particularly the large GEF projects, you actually building platforms of financing, because the GEF resources is a part of it, but you combine that with other donor resources, government resources. And another option in terms of co-financing is that the GEF accepts and considers many different kinds of co-financing. So assets, labor, those are considered in-kind contributions, equipment that the organization already have. So in my experience, that has not been a hindrance. I don't think, I think the co-financing policy is very relevant for us to demonstrate the impact of the GEF. And, I have some numbers here, like over the years, where the GEF has had since its establishment, a contribution of $26 billion with $149 billion in co-financing. And that's a very strong way that we demonstrate to our donors the focus, the efficiency, and the strategic nature of the projects in the portfolio. But I want to highlight one thing also from my experience, and particularly in this thing about the governance. Civil society is already part of the governance structures of the IPs. Since GEF 7, GEF 6, for example, for the forest IPs, and again, that's bringing about the relevance of the stakeholder policy, where we upstream and identified the stakeholders relevant for each program and in each project, and engaging them in a dialogue for the design and the implementation of that program is something that has been modus operandi, I should say, of many of the IPs. So, for example, in the wildlife IP, we have the major CSOs that work in that space in an advisory panel to the steering committee of the program. For the indigenous, for the critical biomes, the critical forest biomes IPs, for the Amazon, for Central America, we have indigenous peoples organizations also in these steering committees. So I think these are the kinds of examples that we can give, concrete examples that we can give, that some of these ideas are already in practice. But I think we should definitely expand them, and I'm a champion for that, because I really believe on the dedicated windows is because where we test ideas, where we have flexibility, and where we make the case for expanding these and mainstreaming these into larger projects under the star allocation, under the focal area windows, and under the IPs. And we're speaking a lot in jargon here, so I hope the whole audience understands the GEF. We apologize for that. But the integrated programs, it's a science to understand the GEF and all these different ways of doing it. But we are at your service at the Partnerships Division, and we'd be glad to take separate discussions and provide, a GEF 101 for whoever needs it. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. There are a lot of learnings that I think needs to be scaled up and implemented throughout the GEF IPs. But now to you, Anders. We want an ambitious replenishment. How can we scale up funds and bring in new contributors? If replenishment places fall short, how can we ensure inclusion commitments for youth, women, indigenous people, and civil society are not the first one to be cut?
I'll try to be as positivistic as I can in these times on this one. Sweden is doing what we can to do our share to stand behind the GEF. We had the GEF CEO, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, visiting Stockholm in April, meeting with both our Minister of International Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade and our Minister for Climate and Environment, while also meeting with the domestic civil society, academia, and private sector. And this is a way for us to demonstrate that the whole of our society stands behind the GEF as a multilateral financial mechanism in implementing multilateral environment agreements. And we are certainly also having civil society consultations domestically, both ahead of GEF-9 and the COP30. In going into the GEF-9 replenishment, we have sent out a 12-point agenda non-paper through the Council, where we have firmly and openly stood behind Carlos Manuel's whole of society agenda and several of the other points of the GEF-9 reform. Sweden is actively reaching out to broaden the donor base, and we are doing what we can to encourage others to step in. Also new contributors, even however symbolic the contributions would be, they would still be very welcome and helpful to principally stand behind the GEF in itself as an efficient and results-oriented multilateral mechanism. Sweden has always taken an active stance to show leadership in our pledges to encourage other parties to match ambition, and we are cautiously hopeful for GEF-9. At the same time, we all know of the current geopolitical environment, and in a worst-case scenario, we risk having to deliver the same with less resources that will put all areas of the fund for tough choices. I'm therefore glad you mentioned scaling up funds. We work actively also to look into how we can make GEF-9 become better at scaling up additional private sector resources. And what will be essential there is how we can all collectively take our shared responsibility in the design of GEF-9 and an efficient whole of society process to be both inclusive while also not providing an impediment in terms of bureaucracy or time span, which might risk hindering scaling up additional resources. Because I think it's clear both in terms of the Baku target and the Kunming-Montreal framework, global framework, that we will need both the donor resources and additional resources to reach the targets. And GEF is very well suited and positioned to initiate projects in an inclusive way, which can also pull in additional resources and scale things up. And the civil society and local communities and IPs are very well suited to be an advocate to sustain the results which we achieve, to make sure that they are continuous and not just for the duration of the project. So we all have an essential role there, and we all need to work together to see how we best can achieve this in GEF-9. Because to us, the GEF is delivering. In GEF-8 to date, as of the latest council meeting in June, we have 1.9 billion tons carbon oxide equivalents, which is a very sizable result even compared to national levels of emission in many individual states. The recent biodiversity achievements exceed the total area of land of my home country. So that's also a very sizable achievement, which we should all be proud of and sort of continue and sort of keep working on ahead in GEF-9. And while these achievements are impressive, we need to work together to sustain them, to continue delivering to the multilateral environment agreements and to the conventions. And in the end of the day, to sustain a high ambition in delivering results is necessary to continue justifying also the strong pledges. So to us, these results are clearly very helpful in that sense as well, because they show we have results at the scale. We have the administrative costs, which Mopan demonstrated recently were about half of what a UN organization would cost. And that is also very important. So to us also, the key to justify strong civil society allocations are in the end of the day, therefore for the same reason also to demonstrate how the civil society is a crucial and integrated part in this sort of joint effort multilaterally to deliver results which we have collectively agreed on. So I would put more emphasis on that, demonstrate how the civil society helps sustain result, helps scale up result, and help being part of the solution. And I think we should all be proud of what we have achieved so far in GEF-8 and working to see how we can sustain that in GEF-9. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. Now to you, Adriana. GEF-9 emphasizes innovation and whole of society. How can we fund and mentor youth-led initiatives linked to integrated programs? Would you support piloting a youth accelerator mechanism inside GEF-9?
This is, we need to, unpack what do you mean by a youth accelerator. But certainly youth is a priority for us in GEF-9. As I mentioned, we are working not only with the Fonseca program in terms of capacity building, but particularly with the youth networks. And as I mentioned, the portfolio of the GEF is such a richness and such a wealth. In this research we're doing, trying to highlight and look for projects that do that. For example, we are looking into initiatives of creating internships for youth within the executing agencies of the projects and in actual parts of the project execution on the ground. So this is a very concrete, and we have some projects in Mozambique that are doing that, and also in Brazil. Another interesting approach is in the food program, the food IP, where there is a gender and youth initiative throughout. We just sponsored jointly on their recent meeting in Africa, and it's particularly focused on young farmers, small farmers initiative. So I think we are looking at these cases and see how in this dialogue with the agencies, with the executing partners, and again, very important of the GEF Secretariat and the GEF Secretariat activities, facilitating the dialogue with the country governments. And our CEO has this vision of this whole of government and whole of society coming together. So if the GEF is a broker of this relationship and bringing closer the government decision makers to civil society, to youth, to women-led groups in the countries, I think we can only promote a more impactful and deliver better results in the initiatives that the GEF funds. So again, this approach that we're having are working at all the levels, coming from the global level, at the level of the multilateral environmental agreements that we support, the regional levels in our country engagement strategy, and directly into projects through our dialogue with agencies and government. But the positive aspect of this is that we already have some very good examples in the portfolio, and if we can expand this, we can multiply, we can use them as models for future proposals in the GEF-9, that would be something that we will definitely pursue. Thank you. But I want to learn more and talk more about what you're thinking about the youth accelerator. Let's take that on the side. I really admire the work of the organization Plant for the Planet that does amazing work with youth. This we just encountered this example of the internships in GEF projects, and we're very fascinated by that, because one of the issues facing youth is jobs. The jobs agenda is very relevant. We have that similar approach also in the wildlife program, particularly with guides and park rangers, also focusing a lot on generating jobs for youth in that program. And so this is, of course, initiatives here and there, importance to bring up this to a scale, but I think those are elements that we want to consider and want to learn more from you and your suggestions on this accelerator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Happy to discuss this separately. Also, in our past conversations, we discussed a lot about how can young people be integrated more into GEF projects. So I think it's just fair that we start talking about this. Before I go to my final questions, to all the audience, please start thinking of questions you might want to ask our panel here. And now a final question to the panel. I'll start with Gabriela, then go to Anders, and to you, Adriana. The question is the same. First, do you support a clear allocation, for example, 10% of GEF-9 resources, to go directly to CSOs, including Indigenous people, youth, and women's groups? If not 10%, what share is realistic? Second, would you also support requiring every government-led project to include a CSO set-aside or participation component? Gabriela.
Thank you, Sagar. I think I hinted to some elements of it already at the very beginning. I don't think, frankly speaking, making a percentage set aside does the deal or gets you to what you actually want to. Because the question is really what do we mean by these 10%? Is it 10% executed through IPLCs and CSOs? Is it 10% targeted at beneficiaries, which are CSOs and IPLCs? Is it 10% implemented through CSOs, i.e. Conservation International and WWF? What do you mean by that? And depending on where you are, you might actually get as many different responses as you have CSOs on the call. I also think there's a very diverse perspective on this, depending on whether you talk to a local CSO or maybe a global CSO, and depending on the geographic context that the organization is working in. And that's maybe the starting point why I think a set-aside fix like that wouldn't make sense. We are a very strong supporter of the SGP, where CSOs are executing agencies, and it's targeted at CSO and IPLC recipients, which we strongly support, and we think that's a good way. We will continue to support the SGP as an important element of the strategic outlook of the GEF. But yeah, a fixed percentage, I think, wouldn't make sense, and you can't scale the SGP to a 10% envelope. Again, that wouldn't. I think we wouldn't support that at large. Then a fixed set aside. I think we might be, like as Switzerland, we would probably be supportive of having a policy that requests CSO engagement in early design stage and make that more rigid and more prescriptive on that front. But I hear Anders' input on that as well, that, you always have the question of how do you design and speed and access and all of those elements. And we already hear from recipient countries that the GEF is ultra complicated to access money and is too slow and this and that, which, by the way, is also strongly supported by many CSOs in the context of the negotiations again. So I think it's a fine line, but I think in principle, we would be supportive of stronger policy requirements on the design front. But again, fixed set-asides, I also don't think there would make sense, because in some contexts, you would want to have the full project or part of a project to be implemented by a CSO. And in other contexts, like Anders was sketching out, sometimes in a country, you have certain areas which have a very strong, for example, IPLC presence, and other areas don't. And then it makes sense that in those where you have a strong presence they have a much larger part in the implementation than maybe in the other section of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. To clarify a bit, 10% of the fund that we are talking about is, first of all, expanding what has already been given through SCP and ICI, and on top, also having a requirement within the IPs. Maybe I absolutely understand that maybe it does not make sense for all projects, but I think a guidance on how to direct funds to civil society organizations through the IPs or have them inclusive in the projects is something we're asking for. Of course, the exact know-hows can be discussed and designed depending on the requirements and depending on the different IPs. As also Adriana pointed out, I think forest IPs, it makes more sense to have even more than 10%. But I think on average, we want to go on the 10%, reach the civil society organizations, including Indigenous people and local communities, youth and women. With this, Anders, the same question to you.
Thank you. And just first to say that I fully share Gabriela's comments, so I will not repeat some of them. To Sweden, we would evidently also need to see the total budget allocation If the budget would increase in line with GEF-8, that would be wonderful. We clearly would hope for that, and it would clearly be very much easier to discuss additional commitments in such an environment. But should the budget decrease, and while not pointing out any individual states which are not present in this call, but I mean, you know what I talk about, we would simply also feel an obligation as a major donor to see that this does not come at the expense of other activities which we also need to sustain through GEF-9. So it's a bit of a balancing act in that regard, that we simply need to make sure that the GEF can continue to deliver on all its areas, including civil society, IPLC, but to also deliver results and scale up additional finance. So we would need to look at it in the context of the totality. And on the 10% target in itself, to Sweden, we, in our development assistance, generally have a bit of a principle to avoid setting fixed targets. And to give a completely other example related to the GEF, for instance, we have a lot of discussions now on the roof of resources for individual implementing agencies, such as, for instance, UNDP. And to us, we actually don't have, the issue for us is not that they have a 30% allocation in itself, but rather that we have some other organizations, including CSOs like IUCN and WWF, who can actually deliver better results at a lower cost in many projects. So sort of that is the angle we want to look at. And the opposite logic goes for CSOs. To Sweden, it's all about contributing to sustain long-term results. And if CSO can prove that they can be a part of this contribution to scale and uphold results, I mean, in practice, we would not mind going beyond 10% in a practical allocation, but we would not sort of commit to a fixed figure simply because we believe that might create blockages in the system as a whole. So rather, we would want to incentivize civil society to be a part of scaling up results. And if civil society can do that, and also implementing agencies, both on implementing agency and through implementing agencies at the local level, by all means, we are happy to have a large civil society participation, but that would also need to be sort of justified out of that it can yield better results than some of the other options. On the small grants program, one aspect of it, which we also need to be open about, is that the transactional costs have been found in evaluations to be quite high. And for us, that also means that sort of the added value of doing projects through the GEF is not necessarily bigger than what we can do bilaterally through our bilateral development agency. So I think that's also something we need to put on the table and all ask ourselves, Secretariat, civil society, donors, how can we collectively look at how we can reduce the transactional cost, with a view, of course, to get more resources out into the implementation at the local level, which is the end result, which I think all of us want to achieve in the end. So I think for that reason, we also need to look how we can create even more resource efficient and result efficient instruments in GEF-9, where we are not opposing the small grants program. Of course, it plays a very substantial role, but also looking at how we can sort of reduce hinders and transactional costs to make more out of it in the work ahead. And we therefore also clearly encourage the civil society to contribute, to consider how can the civil society contribute in dialogue with the Secretariat, in dialogue with us, in dialogue with implementing agencies, to demonstrate how you can help sustain results in GEF-9. And we are at any stage open to take part in such dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anders. Adriana, to you with the same question.
Well, this is, of course, the GEF Secretariat work under the guidance and decision-making of our council. So it relates to these issues. But I just wanted to highlight that our ambition is definitely, and our CEO with his vision on expanding even more the engagement and the participation and having civil society in many different roles. You know, regarding the percentage, you know, it could be misleading it needs a definition if we're setting that, because if we look currently, and if you take into consideration, we're probably above 10%, for sure. You know, if you think about execution, you get the dedicated windows, you get the projects, the beneficiaries of projects, direct recipient of funds, if you get the investments on capacity building and the engagement. So I think it's more of expanding and really proving the value of civil society engagement and indigenous peoples and gender, and that we deliver better projects if we do that. And we actually do. I just want to recall the evaluation, very strong evaluation that we had from the IO on community-based organizations and the impact of that, the sustainability of the GEF investments in those areas. So that's a very strong argument for us in this dialogue that I mentioned, to expand and improve on our mechanisms to work more directly with the civil society organization, community-based organizations. One aspect that I want to mention is that with this learning process, we actually, that we have focusing on SGP that Anders mentioned, the ratios have improved significantly from GEF 7, GEF 8, and I think this is relevant. We are actually also under GEF 8 working on a learning platform for SGP and getting more on all the agencies. We have diversified the agencies for SGP. That has been also another major win, I think, in that direction. So all these elements come together. And I want just to finish by saying that our stakeholder policy actually mandates for engagement of the stakeholders identified upstream to participate in the project design. And not only that, through the review process, and particularly the two-step approach allows for that, because those stakeholders are identified at the concept stage, and then during project preparation, even in the institutional arrangements for the project, of having the civil society participation, all the stakeholders identified participating in the governance of those particular projects, this really changes the outcomes. We have seen that in practice. IAO has proven that. So we have all these elements for this expansion. Of course, from the partnership divisions, our ambitions are high. We want really to continue increase and expand the SGP. We have done that from GEF 7 to GEF 8, and fortunately, we will be able to do that on GEF 9. We want to expand the dedicated window to indigenous peoples, the youth focus of the Fonseca. So I think those are also very important instruments in how the GEF serves and how the GEF partners with civil society, indigenous peoples, local communities, and youth, and women-led organizations.
Thank you, Adriana. Now, I would like to give the floor to any council member, if you are in the room, and if you'd like to add anything. If you'd like to speak, please write your name on the chat and we'll give you the floor. I know this was totally unplanned, but if you'd like to react to our discussions today, you're very much welcome to. We're going to wait 30 seconds and then we will go to the next. I think it's the four of us here. So I would now like to invite Faisal. Faisal is the chair of the CSO Network. Faisal, you've heard today's discussion. From the CSO network's perspective, what's the most important thing to carry forward into the replenishment talks?
Thank you very much, Sagar. And thanks to the panel for really fantastic inputs today and different perspectives, which I think can really help us or guide us in getting the clear message into the replenishment process. So I think, Gabriella, you highlighted specifically, let's come with some really targeted suggestions and be clear rather than rather general in our comments. And I think that is helpful. I just make a few specific things that I've picked up and maybe things that we want to emphasize moving forward into the replenishment. I think that this call for the 10% direct of funds to CSO, I think is still an important target. I think panel members have raised some issues or challenges related to that, and we do need to be specific what we're meaning. I think we're really meaning about scaling up the SGP. We can see that in real terms, SGP funds have decreased despite the incredible value recognized of SGP. The actual core set aside, which is in the part of the replenishment process, there's a core allocation to SGP. We really need that to be increased. It's decreased compared to GEF-5. I mean, that is not progress. So with GEF-9, we need that core allocation. That can be topped up by STAR money or other money, but I think we need to make sure we have an adequate amount so that we can scale up or scale out the SGP. In real terms, really, we've got a decreased amount and an increased demand. So I think that's one area. The second area is of greater engagement of civil society in the full-size projects and medium-sized projects, the larger portfolio. I think, as has been recognized in the meeting, already a lot is being done in that area, and there are some great examples of CSO-led or executed projects, but CSO-executed medium and full-size projects have dropped very significantly over the years, from about 7 or 8% in the beginning down to about 2 or 3% of the portfolio are directly executed by CSOs. And happy to hear again, Anders and Gabriella, you were positive about the CSO execution modality, bringing in extra skills, extra engagement, and preferably reducing costs, improving efficiency, and directly getting the support on the ground. But I think there has, for some time, in going back to the GEF stakeholder policy, been a requirement to actively track and report every year on the success or the level of CSO engagement in the portfolio. But I think that has not been happening. That's not coming back in the reports to council. Maybe it's tracked somewhere, but I think we need to look at that. Are we doing a better job? We don't have the figures. Maybe there is new analysis. Adriana, you mentioned about that. I think there's better tracking and reporting of the actual civil society engagement, and to have that differentiated by Indigenous people, local communities, civil society organizations, women and youth is really going to help us see, are we really making progress? Otherwise, I think that can be lost. I think we also have to do a better job, and that's come across in really articulating what is the value add from CSO engagement. This is not just a box to tick. It's really a value add that we need to have. And we know from the evaluations and from many other work, community-based approach is a resilient approach, is a lasting approach, is continuing on beyond the project period. We're seeing that in real continuing results and change in society. And I think the council and replenishment have called for this whole of society. Why? To lead to that transformation, to lead to that long-term change, recognizing that GEF money is a small amount globally, but it really can be transformational if we can link to multipliers through civil society movements, multipliers through other mechanisms. Lastly, I'd like to just touch on the importance of cross-cutting capacity building. We have the Fonseca initiative, which has targeted a certain group of building leaders in conservation. But I think one of the things going forward is to look at broader cross-cutting capacity building for civil society. I mean, if we increase the fund, increase the opportunity for civil society, but they don't have the mechanism or capacity to integrate or to lead or implement projects. There are in some regions many civil society who have that skill, who have been implementing projects, but in other regions those skills are not there. So I think it's good as part of the overall strategic allocation that resources are put aside for broader capacity building of civil society to better engage in projects and better multiply the benefits. I think we used to, under GEF, I can't remember, GEF 4, GEF 5, cross-cutting capacity training, GEF capacity development initiative, but I think that's been dropped out of the programming. But it would be very good to bring that back as a way of really making this whole of society approach. And not just Indigenous people, local community, but if we're looking at whole of society, we're looking about private sector, we're looking at youth, we're looking at women, we're looking at others. And I think to many of them, GEF is a strange beast that speaks a strange language. At least we need to train people or to understand, to get that engagement. And in the papers for replenishment, I think has emphasized again the importance of the national level steering committee for GEF, and to have a whole of government engagement, multiple ministries on that. But in addition, we need civil society representation, civil society organization, Indigenous people and local communities. That has worked very successful in countries like Philippines and elsewhere that have always had civil society organizations on the steering committee, and that has given really a people-centric approach to many of the programs coming out of countries like the Philippines. Let's use that, let's scale that up, and I think we need to look at some incentives that will encourage countries or reward countries with some top up or something additional if they include that. I mean, not massive money, but some incentive that will say, let's do that, or let's take a pilot and look at 20 countries who are first in the door to get that incentive and show how it works so it can be scaled up in future. So I think those are the key things I'd like to pick up from the discussion, and that we would look to move forward in the further deliberations. But I think it's been very useful to have this input and guidance, and that we really need to sit down and fine-tune and draw and document what has really worked and what is that value-added story. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. If you'd like to react, Gabriela, Anders, Adriana.
I can just say thank you, Faisal. We're looking forward to the targeted inputs and your interventions in the replenishment meeting. And I think it would be helpful if you maintain your call for the 10% or something similar, that you're as specific as possible what you mean exactly by it. Yeah, thanks.
I can also say I much appreciate these comments, and what you say about CSO incentives, fully on board with that. We should look at how can we sort of pave the way to show what works best and give additional resources to where we can really demonstrate that the whole of society and our joint cooperation yield good results and outcome, and fully on board on what you say about the community-based approach, sort of providing long-term results. Also seen that in the field myself, so fully understanding of that, and happy, of course, to continue to discuss ahead.
Thank you, Faisal. Very important points. We are allies. What can I say? In our convincing dialogue. But I really want to take on the side your numbers, where you get your numbers on the decrease of the CSO executing, because you're getting something different. But we still need to look more in our portfolio. We're extracting the data, so we certainly would discuss that with you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now we will turn to our audience. Please raise your hands if you'd like to ask questions to the panel. We'll then let you unmute the microphone. Okay, please. I can see somebody from WEC Kenya raising hands. I let you unmute. Could you try to unmute now?
Okay.
Please
My
go
name
ahead.
is Jacob Mwanduka. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please be brief.
Yes.
Your
I'm
name
from Kenya,
and your question.
I've seen global environmental facility projects and especially small grant schemes where they've made a huge difference in terms of changing the people's attitude and the way they see conservation, the way they do conservation, and the way they feel conservation. It's important that this particular area of work should not be forgotten. Personally, I worked for World Wildlife Fund for 10 years working in Lake Nakuru project. And I've seen how the grassroots approach with the local indigenous people on the lead can make a huge difference. It might be not the first year, but by the second year, third year, people will understand why, how, and why we are going that direction. So it's something which I think should be considered broadly rather than the big CSOs like WWF, ICUN, and so on, which sometimes lack the actual grassroots support, like in the villages in the Middle East of Norway, in Africa and in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to react?
Saga, my suggestion would be to get sets of questions, so.
Yeah, let's do that. Matthews, I requested you to unmute.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are you able to get me?
Yes.
Sure. I would say this has been a wonderful platform. I have gotten a lot of insights from different speakers talking about the fund. But I would say it has been a very difficult for small organizations based in rural communities in different countries to access funds for climate actions, such as the conservation. In our case, we are doing a project which is centered on community-based, where we are promoting community-led forest management by trying to train as communities in terms of forest management, and also establish community forests. But accessing funds for these activities, it has been a very big challenge, more especially that there is a competition in terms of accessing the fund. I heard one of the speakers mentioned that they are working with WWF as one of the implementers or display of this fund. But again, even accessing fund for small organization or community-based organization in the communities, it has been very difficult for them to access fund from these or CSOs, which is being given the funds to help small organizations based in rural areas. So I wanted just to ask, could be there a guidance or a criteria so that this fund can reach to the communities who are most in need of these communities, make sure that these are the people who are being affected with climate change issues, because the people who are accessing most of this fund are those who are located in urban areas. But when it comes to difficult remote areas, they are not much benefiting from this fund. So is there any way of how this fund can trickle down to the most need of this fund? That's the question I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Let me take one more question. NAD, I've requested you to unmute.
Thank you so much, Sagal. Good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon in Nigeria, precisely from the South region of Nigeria. My name is Anedi. I run an NGO that works with the women, youth, and children and climate change. I want to appreciate the speakers and the CSO leaders for organizing this webinar to enlighten us on the processes and projects of GEF. I have particularly attended one session of GEF training in my area, but I had put it in the question box. What are the programs which programs of GEF is going on in my country, Nigeria? And then I have heard the last speaker also ask about what are the programs, how can the small CSOs key into this GEF funding? We've been members of GEF CSO for 3 years or more, and then we've never benefited from this GEF project. How can we really be part of this? And also, I'm appealing for GEF funding for me to go and present my project at COP30. I'm researching on climate change, and I want to do a presentation for my PhD, and I want to do a presentation at COP30, but I don't have funding. So I need that assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll let the speakers take the questions and react.
I could maybe start with the first part of the last question, and there was a similar question from Abdul Ganja Ibrahim also in the chat. Which project areas in the GEF is most likely to support Africa? So from our point of view, we fully stand behind that there is a strong domestic ownership in the implementing countries in selecting and prioritizing between the focal areas in terms of what projects are proposed at the country level. So that is perhaps my short answer to that question, that in the case of Nigeria, then it would be in the whole of society process with the focal point of Nigeria to prioritize from your domestic context which of the focal areas make most sense. Perhaps it's the desertification paired with biodiversity paired with climate, but you know the better context domestically better than we do. And I also wanted to pick up another question/comment from Tinada Youth Action Africa in the chat, in that I think it's a very valid and important point that in some countries CSOs contribute to strengthen accountability. And I think that also in line with what Faisal said about sort of providing positive incentives in this slide, I think that is a very important point which we would fully stand behind. Thank you.
Maybe I can quickly add. So if you want to know what the running program portfolio is in your country, go to the GEF website and then to projects or what we do, and then you can access the project database. You can enter your country and select, and then you see all, like you get a fact sheet of your country, you see all the running projects, the ones which have been completed, and get an idea what has been going on and is going on currently. But forward looking, as Anders was saying, we similarly think that, especially now with this idea of having stronger country ownership also as part of GEF-9, we foresee a strong national dialogue, including all stakeholders. So that means civil society organizations, IPSCs, youth, very much so from our perspective. And that's, in our view, where and when the strategic outlook for a specific country should be made on how it wants to use its own star allocation, as well as where it wants to prioritize to tap into other additional strategic resources which are available in the context of the GEF replenishment, like specific set-asides, be it non-grant instrument, CSO, like SGP and other buckets which are available, IPs that they want to set on, and so on. But that's, in our view, that's truly a dialogue, and that's where like the collective should decide this is what we want to do with the money that is allocated to our country or our region. We also very much support more regional approaches where we have larger regions coming together. I also chaired the constituency with, for example, many Central Asian countries. And as a chair of that constituency, I always very much nudge them to move towards regional approaches and engage with civil society locally to have that more cross-boundary approach to environmental challenges. And then there was the question of the whole access question, which always comes down to, and I think there it goes to the heart of what do we mean by the 10%, right? Is it like if you execute a project, so it's not like you have a running project and as a CSO you can go to the GEF and say, please give me money to implement this project. It is like the funding is channeled through the country, but if we have this early on in-country design stage, then ideally the CSOs are aware and also push and advocate for projects and programs in the area where there is a certain civil society expertise, and then also implement parts of those projects and programs which are being designed and planned for the country for the GEF-9 period. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Adriana, I saw you unmute. Please,
no, thank you. Just to complement, actually one shortcut to accessing the information on your country at the GEF website, because I invite you to visit the GEF website. It's very engaging. It's just type GEF and the name of your country goes directly to that page. And there you even can find the people who are responsible for from your country, you probably know them, that decide on the use of GEF resources for their country. In the operational focal point, the political focal point. In fact, the GEF, we are very transparent. This is, on the guidance of our council members here. We strive a lot for this transparency. All the documents for the new approach are also on the website under the replenishment process. You just put GEF replenishment and then you have access to the documents that we have. So this is part of our engagement strategy to be very transparent in what we do. But going to the questions, I see questions about grassroots organization support. As mentioned, they has to be part of a project. And actually, there has been some very interesting experiences and initiatives that the GEF has been associated with what we could say kind of local regranters. We have a partnership with organizations called Conservation of Environmental Trust Funds. They're very strong in Africa. There is a very strong network of these organizations called CAFE, and they have a lot of programs for communities. And not only with GEF resources, with bilateral resources, we related from foundations. We have some very active ones in Madagascar, Botswana, Namibia. Namibia now, the GEF is supporting conservation trust fund for the 84 conservancies in Namibia, in Gabon as well. So these are very important local organizations. They act as, they bring the funds from the donors, and then they have very strong programs on for grassroots organizations, including for Indigenous peoples, local communities, community-based organizations. There is another very strong network in Latin America from that, it's called Red Lock. And they have been, some of these institutions were created with GEF funds. So this is, globally, we have 118 of these organizations. They started more in the biodiversity area, but they are now very active on also climate change. So I highly recommend taking a look at that as well. And I don't know if I'm missing anything, but we can come back. you know, and particularly the SGP. And I think this is very timely that we are having these conversations. And, you know, of course, kudos to the CSO Network for organizing this whole dialogue. We have had a similar dialogue guided by IPAG with Indigenous Peoples organizations. So the division is supporting these two sets of dialogues on GEF-9 that I think are extremely rich for this engagement with you all. And SGP is our flagship program. So we really, you know, very grateful for your support to SGP, and now how to participate in the national steering committees of SGP in Nigeria. For example, SGP is very large, and many of you are engaged in that. I also want to highlight, the Gabriela mentioned that the Secretariat supports the national dialogues. And through the CSO network, we receive suggestions on who to invite to these national dialogues in country. And that's very important now, because next year we hope to see the countries requesting for us to start planning the national dialogues for planning the GEF-9. So I think this is another very important opportunities that we work closely with the CSO network and on increased membership for the CSO network, you know, so that we can strengthen even more this fora of participation and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. I know that Anders has to leave us at sharp 15:30, so in 2 minutes. So Anders, thank you very much for joining. But if Gabriela, Adriana, and Faisal, you could stay, I would like to take a few more questions from our audience. Anders, you can stay here as long as you have the capacity, but thank you very much for joining. For the next round of questions, please state your name and go directly to the question so we can take as much as possible. I'll try to take 4 questions. Abdul, I'm requesting you to unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, Saga, Andrea, and Anders for this brilliant opportunity. I just wanted to say, Andrea has already spoken a lot of what I wanted to say about the STP. So what I wanted to say for the 10% that was spoken about, that has been clarified. For CSOs to access more of the GEF funding, I think the STP is, as we can say, the highway to financing those communities that do not have the capacity to actually implement bigger projects. In our country, in the different countries where we are working, I think we need to have some kind of independent evaluation of the way SDP is working, you know, to determine what else we can do to improve it. Because as for me, I will always say SDP is the best way to reach out to communities, to reach out to smaller organizations, to reach out to CSOs. Because even when CSOs want to implement projects, most of them in some developing countries do not have access to internet to be able to access information on the GEF platform. But if the small grants program is present in that country, when they advertise, they don't just put on newspapers, they also send to different outlets like the EPA, the councils, time board, and so forth. So those informations are available at the least country level in communities. So that's the way to increase the participation of CSOs. So if we want to actually help communities or community organizations to benefit, I think it is more of trying to change the rule of the star allocation per country so that the small grants program can have access to more star allocation to increase their portfolio, to be able to reach out to greater CSOs at the country level. Because at the moment, in most countries like mine, you cannot access more than 10% of the star allocation. Sometimes it is even less because the capital projects from GEF agencies are so big that they go for the allocation per country. And at the end of the day, when those allocations are given to the GEF agencies, it is even less than 5, sometimes between 5 and 7% left for the SGP to access it. And in that way, we are not able to service the numerous CSOs that want to benefit from the small grants program. So that's what I just wanted to state so that you can consider it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul. I'm going to take a question from Tabitha.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My question is just direct. Hello, you can hear me? Okay. My question is very direct. I want to ask, how are you guys going to help those youth from the grassroots areas to get the grants? Because these people, they have the solution and that the most people who are affected. But when you come to grants, you meet the big organizations which have been having a lot of funds, are the only ones who are still getting the same funds. But us back in the grassroots, we don't have funds and we cannot access them because we are not used to these things. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take next question from Dahiru.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ahiru Adamu. I am from Nigeria, the northeastern Nigeria to be precise. I am working with my organization, Dual Environmental Initiative, which we have been into conservation, climate change activities, and so on. The issue of funding over here in Nigeria, I think, is a problem, especially to the younger organization like ours. We have a very good idea, especially now that we are trying to develop a seed bank, because there are a lot of indigenous species that are going to extinction, and we are trying to bring them back. But funding is needed for this aspect, especially. But I know GEF is doing a lot in conservation of it. I think there is a need for attention on the seed bank to revive the indigenous species that are going to extinction, especially in the northeastern part of the Nigeria here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dahiru. Next, I would take a short question from Tumaini. I've requested you to unmute your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Tumaini, the Vice Chair of GEF CSO Network. My first question is how the GEF Secretariat could think on a special program for children, because when we talk of the whole of society program, we mean also engaging children at their early stages on protecting our planet. And I would like to ask if they could initiate a special climate and project programs for primary schools across Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Because in Africa, most of our children are malnutritioned, and they have very poor access to safe and clean water. All, of course, are the impact of climate change. So I would like to ask Jeff if they could have a special initiative for that. And my other part two question is about the Jeff. Why couldn't Jeff launch a special mapping for civil society in different regions? Because we had received a lot of complaint that for SDP, with different agencies like UNDP and others, sometimes there is repeating CSO qualifying for funding every year, while we have hundreds of successful CSO in the country or in the region, like Eastern Africa. So we would like going forward to have a special mapping of who are the successful CSO in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, so that when we evaluate who are accessing this fund, there is fairness. And the last question is about the upcoming replenishment meeting in Africa, in Botswana. If we really want to implement the slogan, the whole of society approach, I think this meeting is also special for Africa. I would like to also ask GEF Secretariat and to rethink how to increase the number of participants from the civil society network. I would like to have at least one from East Africa, the other from West Africa, Southern Africa, but we have a limitation of only 2 people from the civil society, the global over 800 members. To me, this meeting is very important also for Africa, given the position of Africa in the impact of climate change globally. So for these few questions, I would like to really pause there for your feedback, please.
Thank you, Tumeni. I'm gonna get a quick question from Lloyd, and then we're gonna go with answers. I know there's a lot of questions that we've gathered. Lloyd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sagar, and thanks for hosting, for arranging this. Thanks to the donor organizations and the GEF for participating and leading us through this. The question I'd ask is really for both the donor agencies and the organizations, the GEF, and for the member countries, which I'm not so sure any are represented here. The work that's been done is good work, is serious work. It needs to be scaled up, and clearly there are attempts to do that. My concern is that this work is within the current context of how we, the model of development that we have used on this planet up to this point. And it seems as if we need to have some transition to a different model of development. And I wonder the extent to which, and I know it's not the Secretariat's responsibility to do this, but certainly for the council members, I wonder if there's a possibility within GEF-9 to initiate a discussion around how we transition to some other model that does not depend on the level of extraction and waste that we have now, that can take us to where we need to be in a very short time. Thanks. If that's not clear, then I can put it in the chat.
No, thank you, Lloyd. I'm going to take a question from Ruben. Please, you can unmute yourself now.
Thank you so much, Saga. My name is Ruben, chairman from the Carbon Environmental Awareness Society in Botswana. I'm looking forward to be hosting you guys here for the session. Having been working in the forefront with local communities to adapt to climate change, through creating climate resilience using local community-led interventions. I have been listening to the presentations that really were making insights that were maybe relevant with some of the situations that we see in the ground as CSOs as we implement projects that are maybe GEF funded. It's sad because as CSOs, we are the voice, we are the leading voice of the local indigenous people who sometimes are suffering injustice from the same government that is hosting them. And in that way, it makes it difficult for them to access funds for GEF, because in other situations, the requirements are such that you have to go to this government entities to request for cover letters to support your project. I mean, a community in the Okavango Delta will be fighting to protect the concession against the government to do its mining operations and oil exploration. But yet they have to go to the same government and request for letter to protect that concession by accessing funds to GEF. And and eventually that can happen because the government will never empower the indigenous people to be able to fight for their rights. And this is where maybe sometimes I felt like the GF funding is sometimes, missing the situation that it is on the ground. And you find that the intended beneficiaries, I mean, GEF is the lifeline of indigenous people and local communities, such that I'll give an example. We started Carbon Environmental as young graduates 15 years ago. And back then, the government has just signed the Paris Agreement, and we were coming to say, how do we now capacitate our local people to now know their obligations in implementing the Paris Agreement? And we were not getting the support from government, no matter how many times we tried to engage them as the important stakeholders and partners to ensuring that we implement the capacity building initiatives that we had put in place to work with the government. And if we don't have the resources, our mandate cannot be visible on the ground. Thanks to GEF, 2 years ago, we only started to get our first funding, and we only started to do the long...
summarize your question, please?
Okay, we only started to do the long overdue capacity building that was supposed to be. And I think GEF, when we are going towards the funding line, we need to see how do we harmonize this relationship of important partners and indigenous people such that the beneficiaries are able to implement their projects on the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, Gabriela, Adriana, Faisal, the floor is yours. A lot of questions. Let's try to be concise.
Thank you. Yes, I'll try to touch upon as many as possible. There was a lot of conversation about SGP and suggestion for an SGP evaluation. I think our chair in the council is probably one of the strongest advocates for evaluations and integrating results of evaluations. The last SGP evaluation was 2021. Then we had a community-based approaches evaluation that some of us were speaking to from 2024. In general, I think we're very supportive of having evaluations in that space. It's something to pick up with the IEO also on how to spin it, since we had the community-based approaches one very recently. Star allocation, very touchy topic. And also the matching of star versus set aside, very strongly recipient countries ask for as much star as possible, and with that for as much country drivenness as possible and as little set aside. And then now we hear from you want more set aside, less star. There's a tension point there that we're very aware of. Then linking of the scaling to larger projects, the SGP to larger projects. Yes, there also has been an evaluation similarly on like scalability of GEF projects, not just on the SGP, but at large. And there was also an analysis of the SGP specific ones, and that speaks to the sustainability of GEF projects as well. And there we did have some quite good results when we have strong civil society involvement. So meaningful involvement, which goes to the point that Faisal was making, communicating the value added of getting early on civil society involvement. More fairness across organizations, the whole like access question, I can only repeat myself. National dialogues are key, and that's where the conversation needs to happen. And from a council perspective, we don't want to interfere there because we do see that there's a certain leadership that needs to come from the country itself and the ownership. I do see the tension point, though, to the last speaker. We're very aware of political challenges within different national contexts, especially when we speak to IPLC rights and rights in general, tension points. That's why we try to have as meaningful safeguards, environmental and social safeguards as possible, which should specifically speak to that point. But yes, I do recognize that tension point very much. At the same time, I don't think the council at large has an appetite to move away from this country drivenness and strong like national OFP ownership. And so moving around these endorsement letters is very, very difficult, recognizing the challenges that it means. And I think I'll leave it at that. Oh, sorry, there was one point on the sustainable development with less use of resources and trash. Couldn't agree more. I think that's the whole point of the GEF. We're very much trying to move in that direction. And I also wish it would move a little bit faster with more resources, but we are in the realities that we're in. But I do think that's the overarching strategic outlook of the GEF goes specifically in that direction. Thank you.
Just to complement, I think Gabriela gave an excellent points there. You know, we have an evaluation being prepared for the SGP, another one, you know, focusing on GEF 7, and this is going to be coming before the end of GEF 8. So more resources and data for us to learn, because we're always striving to improve. I think we have very important policies. You know, we also recognize these tensions. I think the set aside the windows have proven to be strategic when we deal with these issues that were raised regarding STAR. And we have strong elements. We have a window called Inclusive Conservation Initiative that's dedicated to Indigenous Peoples organizations. So I really recommend to take a look into that and the opportunities there. Is also a window we want to expand under GEF-9. In relation to the issues of the development tensions that are posed, I want to really highlight that, and we emphasize again, that the GEF is an environmental fund. We are focusing on delivering global environmental benefits. We understand the issues related to, and we try to address them with our environmental and social safeguards policies. But we are not a developed agency. You know, we have the multilateral banks, we have the bilateral cooperation. The focus of the GEF, and it's a mandate from our council, is a mandate from our establishment, and we serve the conventions. We started with the biodiversity, climate change, and the land degradation conventions, and now we're serving 6 conventions. And we have mandates from these conventions. So it's very important that we stay on our mission and we focus on delivering the results there. And we appreciate very much this dialogue and can really look forward to, with the inputs from our advisors in the CSO network, our advisors in the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, we improve on our practices and we deliver more results. Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe I can just pick up on a couple of issues. I think Lloyd's comment that we need to embed within the programming directions and the work of GEF to look at a different paradigm shift of how development is being done to move towards more circular economy and integrated approach. The link up and flexibility at the country level, I think, which is allowed under GEF, enables that mixing of resources, but we need this integrated approach and shifting to a sustainable circular economy approach, which can meet many of the targets. The second point, I think, is we need really to try whatever we can to get an ambitious replenishment. If we get only the same or less than we've got in the GEF 8, given the increasing demands, the new conventions, we've got plastics, we've got areas beyond national jurisdiction, more and more demands. But if we have the same or less resources, it's going to put a strain on everything. So we have to do whatever we can to identify additional funders to get the current donors to increase beyond whatever contributions they gave before. When we look at the real benefits compared to the investment needed, the real benefits of GEF are really demonstrated in the results. And so we need to do whatever we can with action by civil society, multiple group, to really move forward and make this a successful replenishment, even when it's a challenging time. And maybe challenging time, and the new replenishment will run up to 2030, where we all have the SDG goals and many goals that we've all committed to do and committed to scale up funding. So we really need to walk the talk. Everyone need to walk the talk and to deliver. So really we want to work with everyone who's been on the call today and all of the GEF contributors and others to really make this a very successful and to get the real recognition of the importance of GEF in delivering on all our goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Thank you all the participants. And thank you to our panelists, Adriana, Anders, and Gabriela, for sharing your insights with us today. This brings our session to a close. Our fourth session will be in about 4 to 5 weeks, Wednesday at the same time, after the replenishment meeting. And we'll share the invitation with all of you who've joined these sessions soon. So that ends the official program for today. Please also leave us feedback on Luma. You'll get an email with a link, and we'd really value your thoughts on how you found the session and what we could improve and what we could focus the next sessions on. I'll stay here together with my colleagues from the CSO Network if anyone would like to connect or ask questions related or unrelated to the session. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. This has been such a very important initiative, and let's keep with the following sessions. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.